So hello one more time. As you may already know, my name is Ivan, and I'm a solution engineer here at Starwind. And today our topic is Dell 14 Gen servers, the new servers that have come quite not recently, I would call it, but some time ago, and maybe not a few are quite familiar with them. So I'll try to give you some food to thoughts and some of my ideas, my personal preferences, and pros and cons on each of the model. So without further ado, let's start in, and I'll start with agenda for today's webinar. And first of all, we will see the overview of 14 Gen, just like regular what's new compared to the 13 Gen. Some new cool features. They do have that cool features. And second one will be the best models for some certain type of workloads. So for instance, if we're talking about full mechanical drives and big storage capacity, that will be the one model. If we're talking about like small amount of storage but big amount of compute, that will be completely different model. And in the end of our webinar, we will have question and answer block. But prior to that, we will have some kind of spec in servers, and I'll do that with you. So I prepared live optic run for you today, and that's not really easy one. So we will try to spec out the server, having the data from live optics. Hopefully we will be able to do that. And first that I would like to talk about is the new Dell EMC PowerEdge Gen 14 features. And so yeah, definitely that's not only like I would call 14 Gens not the only one who has additional features, but besides that, a new bezel. And I will start with LOM cards, or we can call it LAN and motherboard card. And the term refers to a chip or chipset capable of network connection that has been embedded directly on the motherboard or desktop, workstation, or a server. In our case, most likely that will be a server. So instead of requiring a separate network interface card to access a local area network, such as Ethernet, it can be easily attached to the motherboard. An advantage of LOM system is an extra available PCI slot that is not being used by the network adapter. And that's really helpful if we're talking about multi-node scenarios where you really need and where you want to have each available network interface for your production or there's management connections. Either it would be 10G, 1G, or 40G. Like free network interfaces will be another bad idea. The second option is Dell Boot Optimized Storage Solution. That's the long term, and the short one will be BOSS. And that's a new option for the installing of the hypervisor part. So like in the virtualization host, it's kind of, I would call that really dependent. Do you have additional slots for OS or not? And some time ago, we have the cards where you would be able to install E6i on. They have been really small. They haven't that RAID 1 on top of them. So that was something not you might be really comfortable about. And BOSS cards, they are truly redundant. They are basically mirrored in a RAID 1. So the BOSS solution provides the separate hardware RAID functionality for the OS drives, while also freeing up an additional drive slots to be used for dataset. And it's a PCI card with a flash memory, so it's fast enough and provides just block level service like other disks. And the third new feature that I would like to touch on will be DPAT, or Dell Processor Acceleration Technology. And it's enabled through the BIOS, provides a better performance solution than turning turbo off to force operation at the lowest base frequency of the processors, while maintaining a more consistent turbo frequency state. That's a bit hard to pull off, I mean, like in terms of technology, but in general, that's just like boosting your processors. The only one real drawback that I see of this technology is that you can use it only on certain type of processors. To be exact, this will be EF5 2690, and you can only use these for certain chassis. That makes this feature even more attractive. So you can use this DPAT feature only on R720 and R720 HD. Also has R620, but R620 is a bit more storage less, but I'll talk a bit later about storage and chassis by itself. So yeah, that was basically all the new features of Dell 14G servers. And I would like to speak about the best in class. That's how I call them. But in general, that's mostly the main chassis that I'm using as a solution architect to build the infrastructures and to build the systems for my clients. And I will start with the smallest one, Dell R640. And this is kind of an ideal combination for just jumping into the IT management. And it can start with or 1U and 1U and sorry 2 sockets platform. And basically, this server was built to handle only SSDs. And I do have really big kind of concerns about with server exactly from storage capacity standpoints, because you can only use 4 either mechanical drives or SSD drives for this server. So if you are fine with RAID 5, for instance, and 3 usable drives, and that will provide you with something around 6 TB usable as max, that's something you can go with. But I'm not really feeling a lot more comfortable if we're talking about being full maxed chassis, because I would love to have the future grow in terms of like I don't really prefer to have the small server with wholly populated chassis. Either I would pick the bigger server but have some room to breathe to grow. And one thing to take into account is that it's really cost efficient in terms of electricity. So that's just 1U, and it can have some decent compute resources. So from what I remember, you can use uh, up to 28 cores, and if we're gonna check hyperthreading, that will be even more, and up to 24 DIMMs. So if you're starting and you really know that, okay, I have like 1 TB of data, but I need some kind of serious compute resources, like 16 core processors, for instance, you can freely go with R640. You will have more than enough storage, and you will have good paychecks and electricity. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And going next, we have Dell EMC PowerEdge R740 HD. That's by far my favorite model, and I would describe in a second why. But in general, just go to the overview of this model, and this is 2U 2 socket platform, and it's basically was designed for software-defined storage, and I would call maybe Hadoop's big data users and co-location hostings. And you can have a lot of usable storage. Chassis pricing is quite friendly. Electricity usage shouldn't be an issue at all. And really one big pros, or not really one, but the main pros of this model is the chassis. You can fit up to 12 3.5-inch drives in the front, 4 3.5-inch in the middle, and 2 3.5-inch in the rear. So in total, we will have 18 3.5-inch drives in just 2U server. That just living dream of any data hoarder. And that's obviously can be also used as solid state drives if we're going to use transceivers or just carriers for solid state drives. And I really prefer this server over than R940, because R940 by itself is really not budget friendly, just comparing chassis to chassis without need to add additional compute resources. So I would say R740 HD is the most valuable model for me in terms of balance between cost efficiency and the amount of storage and compute resources that you're able to fit there. So compute resources can go up to from what I remember, around 50 cores. With hyper-threading, that will be around 100, and 1.5 terabyte RAM, because you can use 64G RAM DIMMs, and that's really, really a lot. And the best and the biggest one, maybe not the best in terms of cost efficiency, but the biggest definitely will be Dell EMC PowerEdge Air 940. And this is a free unit and 4 sockets platform, and it handles extremely demanding mission critical workloads like ERP systems or very large database, I mean SQL database. And from what I gathered, if you're really planning to go to the 4 sockets, you can check this model unless you have some, because like if we're talking about 4 sockets and you're using 10 cores, for instance, you might think like, hey, do I really want to pay for 4 sockets for licensing, either going ESXi or VMware plus backup licensing? Because if you're backupping with Veeam also will count the sockets, or maybe like 90% of the backup players, they will also count the sockets. So you might think if you're really willing to have 40 cores in total for 2 node scenario, you can just switch to the R740 and go with 2 10 cores and just combine them, or just use 2 12 cores, 2 20 cores, whatever. I mean, you can go to the R940 only if you're planning to use some extremely, like, really aggressive critical amount of compute resources. And yeah, for that, this machine is just like awesome. This server is big, and only one drawback besides the pricing from R940 will be that you're not able to fit mechanical drives more than 2 terabyte in this model. And this, from what I've seen, is a really big drawback, because if we're talking about a lot of compute resources, they might not be really used a lot without any storage resources. So that's something that I would call really big drawback of this solution. And the last part of our small webinar will be basically talking about live optics. And I guess a lot of you already know what is this, how you can use that, but for one who don't know, I'm just gonna throw really fast what is Dell ZPack, or live optics, how they call it right now, by itself. So Dell ZPack is basically an analytical kit that is able to gather information from your server and providing that as or PDF format, or just a regular image, or like not a PDF. I forgot how that Excel. Yeah, thanks for helping, chat. Excel format. So basically, there is 2 possibility of reading the DPack. Taking into account the highest numbers that you've seen over here, might be a bit of an overkill. Same goes for lowest numbers. So we should be somewhere in the middle. And if we're talking about capacity, over here I would recommend to going around like maybe 80 terabytes, because you will never really be kind of a lot of happiness, and you won't be really excited if we're talking about locking you inside of the box and you won't have any room to grow at all. So I would say something around 80 terabytes over here will be kind of cost efficient option, and something that should be done. And if we're talking about IOPS over here, so we see 5K, close to 5K IOPS right now, and that's ringing the bell that we will need at least some sort of the all flash for high performing VMs. So from my experience, I can say that there is no system where all virtual machines are the same. So in 99%, there is 5% of virtual machine which are really mission critical, which requires a lot of horsepower, and the rest is either just remote desktop connections, desktop servers, email servers, stuff like that. So they don't really need that kind of performance, and they don't really need to be on all flash. From over here, I already knew that customers, they want to have 20 terabyte of flash, and all the rest can be mechanical drives. So for that, I'll recommend to go in split of 70-30 if we're talking about mechanical drives ratio to the solid state drives. So for this case scenario, we're going to bump up the ratio a bit more, so it will be some sort about like 65-35, but that was customer preference. So going next, we have peak memory usage and total memory usage. Over here, we can see that servers is a bit overkill in terms of the memory usage and in terms of the usable memory in all. So they are picking at 248 and the total memory is 451. So I'll recommend something if we're talking about two nodes scenario, and I'm specking out right now two node solution because I really prefer to have that high availability between the nodes. If we're talking about Gen servers, I mean like Dell servers, they are truly designed to be hyper-converged. So I'm just keeping in mind that I'm specking two node solution. So I'll say that something around 368 RAM will be more than enough for each of the hosts. And in general, for whole cluster, that will provide us with a lot more than client will probably ever need. But since RAM is not very that cost like expensive, I would say we would have a bit more than just lacking resources. And if we're talking about two nodes scenario, I am specking out a solution to have one node to be able to run whole workload for each of the nodes. So that's mean I don't want to go like to 120 RAM for each of the hosts and like do all that will provide me with 240. But in reality, if one host goes down, all VMs won't be migrate to the partner. So I just want to overspec that, I would call. And the last and more, I would say, kind of doubtful is the cores amount. And the cores is kind of the question over here. So we can see that this DPAC has a lot of virtual machines over here. In total, that is around 60. So over here, peak CPU usage won't affect the amount of virtual cores that you assigned on this VM. So you might be confused. First, you see over here like peak CPU is really low. Why they need that 90 cores and net CPU over general is really a big amount. But that's because the LDPAC just don't know how you assign the cores to your virtual machines. That's something that you should keep in mind and take into account because you can easily just messed up with that. Just like seeing over here, okay, peak CPU resources is really low. I just need 2 8 cores. But in general, over here we will need something around maybe 216 cores because there is a lot of the virtual machines. And from what I know, these virtual machines, they are primarily Windows, and some of them are Linux. And over here you can see basically the ratio of Windows and Linux, Unix machines. And so yeah, over here I will say we definitely need at least 16 cores for each of the nodes. Keep in mind I'm specking two node solutions, so we will have 216 cores in each of the node. In total, we will have 32 for one node and 64 for cluster. And with hyper-threading, we will have around 120. That's rough numbers. I'm not really good at math. So yeah, something like that. So that was pretty quick run through the things that I would like to show you or spoke about. And I guess, yeah, I'm good to have some sort of the questions. And yeah, do not hesitate to drop your questions, and I'll be definitely, hopefully, able to answer them. Okay, I do see first one. Yeah. Um, what about network interfaces for each of them? Okay, so yeah, kind of good question. And so about the question. So first of all, I'll read the question, then I'll answer that, obviously. So what about the network interfaces on each of the server? If we're talking about the models of the Dell 14 Gen, so there is a decent amount of models, so I won't go through all of them. I'll just go through the main models. So for R640, you have one low profile, one LOM on the motherboard, and one T-based. So in total, you can use 3 NICs. For 740, you can do the same, but one more will be T-based. And from 930, you can do the same as in 740, but plus one more T-based. So in general, 930, you can have 4 NICs plus one on LOM and motherboard. Hope that answered the question. Yeah, okay, what about the BOS cards, the maximum amount of storage that you can use from them? From what I remember, the maximum amount of the BOS cards, I mean like the storage that you can use from BOS cards, will be around 225 gig, but I might stand corrected, so I just don't want to say that I'm 100% sure about that. But what I'm sure about that this will be more than enough for IaaS, because I have deployed that many times, but I just don't have rough numbers right now in mind. Sorry about that. How many CPU options you have for 740 HD? That's really a lot. Like, I mean, you have a lot of CPU to choose from, like from silver, bronze, or golden and platinum. There is a lot of the classifications, and there is a lot of I would call that how we can call that models. So that's a bit hard question to answer. I guess you should just like ask Google or Dell. Would a quad-port 10G based T card with a 2-node setup going through a switch be acceptable for all an SSD setup? So see, the question is kinda what switching you have there. If you have just 10G switching and you have all flash, first question first, what amount of flash you have? So if we're talking about like 15 or 20 terabytes of all flash, I'll recommend 25G connection, because that's like 10G might be bottleneck on reads, and 25G will be definitely like a lot more better in terms of throughput. But if you have 10G switch, that basically make no sense, since you're already locked in that switch. Hope that answered the question. Okay, 40B, yeah, you were talking about 40B, 10GB will be more than enough, because like 40B, that's not that big of the amount of resources. Okay, cool. If I want to set up a cluster with 2 servers in one geolocation and 2 other servers in another geolocation, do all the servers need to be the same model? So, okay, that's a bit like tough question in terms of creation. So first of all, I would like to ask a few questions. Are you planning to use the cluster, I mean like to create 2 nodes in one side and 2 nodes on the other side and do cluster for all of the 4 nodes? Or you're planning a bit more like disaster recovery side, so you have 2 nodes on side A, 2 nodes on side B, and some sort of asynchronous replication between them? Um, I'm not seeing an answer from you for now, so I'll go from the next question. Okay. Oh, one large cluster if possible. Yeah, that's possible if you do have a lot of possibility to, like, I mean, the Gao cluster by itself will require a lot of resources. If we're talking about one large cluster between the sites, you should have at least 10G connection between that sites. If you don't have that, the cluster will be basically like one big cluster will be just not a possibility. You then better look to something like one cluster on site A, one cluster on site B, and the asynchronous replication between 2 sites with something like Veeam, and also just to add additional redundancy, I would say maybe some tapes backups to the cloud if that sound fine. I mean, not the physical, but virtual, because physical tapes is not. Yeah, exactly. So if you don't have like the connection between the sites, like 10G for active-active, because cluster, and answering your first question, I'll recommend to have the partners in the cluster the same. If we're talking about 2-node cluster, they should be really the same, because the first cluster rule, like the main cluster rule, is that slowest partner is the The cluster operates as the slowest partner in the cluster. So for instance, if you would have mechanical drives and all flash in one cluster, you won't see any benefit from all flash because performance will be limited to the mechanical drives. Hope that answered your question. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I don't see any other questions, so we can wait for like 1 or 2 minutes. And if you want to have any, I'll say have a great Friday and later on a weekend, because to be honest with you guys, I already thinking about weekend. Like that Friday, I don't even know why they created that Friday. Uh, yeah, I guess thanks all of you for your time. That was a pleasure to spoke for everyone, and have a great rest of the day, Friday, and then weekend. See you.